Hello everyone, welcome back. Got another vid. Also, this is the new shirt I put out. Contact me if you're interested in purchasing one. It's got Earl Tudor, Danny Burton, Don Mayfield, and Mr. Gray. It's called The Conditioners. Nice shirts. They've been selling good. So I appreciate all the purchases, and y'all can contact me on Facebook Messenger, my email, Richard J. Garcia, Richard J. Schoolboy 60 at gmail.com, or on Instagram. This video, again, disclaimer, nothing meant or intended for illegal purposes. Talking about history, knowledge, fiction, however you want to put it. This video here is kind of a follow-up to the previous one about the behavior of dogs, and it's come up in different podcasts. Twins had a thing on it in my group, and I've talked about it previously, whether there are levels to gameness or not. Now, in most people's minds, gameness is finite. You either have it or you don't. And I've spoken to different species of animals that have their own type of gameness. Most people understand, whether they know it or not, they understand the gameness in an American Pit Bull Terrier. And I would agree, a dog is either game or it isn't. But can that gameness be measured? Now, when you say things like that, the understanding is you have to see it. To understand it, you have to see it, to measure it, to judge it. And there's different ways that comes about. But because some people believe, and I can agree either way. You're either game or you ain't, and there's different levels to it, or at least different understandings of it, or different experiences of it, or they can show you in different ways. And there's different scenarios, different how would you say? A lot of different stuff, I guess, involved in it. Right? Different opinions. There's even, and nothing is set in stone as far as scientifically speaking, because it is someone's experience, what they saw, how they measured it, what they had, different circumstances. That's what I wanted to say. That gets you to that understanding of gameness. And when people say you either game or you aren't, they consider that to be under any circumstances. Now, again, that could be true. And when you put it that way, there's very, very few dogs that are actually game, where no matter what, they're not going to quit. But again, I'll go over that a little bit. There's been dogs that have shown extreme gameness, and then we use different metaphors, or what would you want to say, different words, different ways to describe what we're seeing. So I'll mention some of them. Pit game. That in my day, anyways, it meant a dog that would do its thing, but at some point it's going to quit. Generally, if the dog was on top or leading or had the advantage, it wouldn't quit. But put it a little behind, and it would. These other words are kind of self-explanatory. You could say a dog's very game, a dog's real game, a dog's desperately game. The dog's unbelievably game, and any kind of adjective you want to put in front of that word game. And then the final one is dead game, and that one speaks for itself. So in that sense, throughout the history of the breed, there's been very, very few, as far as percentages and numbers go, that dogs have proven to be dead game. Now also in the past, because when we arrived on the scene, and probably a little before us, but not too much more before us, the term dead game was thrown around and used as a term of endearment, you might say, when something or someone showed a lot of heart. And for example, in the past, you'd have dogs up for stud, and I'm talking 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s even. Dogs up for stud that were dead game. And these were dogs that showed so much gameness that the person owning it or seeing it or having it or competing with it didn't think the dog was going to quit. And it didn't in those situations, whatever they were put in, whether it was a roll, whether it was a test, whether it was a match, whether it was off the chain or drop fight or country rules, whatever it is. In their opinion, using their experience, dog wasn't going to quit. So they deemed it to be dead game even though it was alive. Later on, it was taken to mean, well, if you're going to use that term, then the dog had to prove itself until it didn't exist anymore, right? Now that's harsh, that's extreme. And like I said, very few have shown that. But it was took literally that way. So again, people can have their opinions on that. And Mayfield spoke about Tombstone, where he saw him for 5, 10, or 15 minutes, whatever the time limit was, and could tell that he was a deep game dog. And people go, well, you can't tell that in that short amount of time, and which that kind of makes sense. But again, if you know game dogs, if you understand their behavior, if you understand their intent, if you know how to read the signs, the body language, and their eyes, and everything that's involved with it, and you have that experience of seeing a lot of dogs quit and several dogs show gameness, then in a lot of people's opinions, yeah, you can tell the dog's pretty game, if you want to put it that way. Maybe not dead game, maybe not desperately game, even though Tombstone himself to prove to be one of those types of being desperately game. And the reason I say that is he just wouldn't quit. And he took a lot of punishment. And he stumbled and his legs buckled and he still scratched and he had no intent of quitting and he just would not stop. And he beat Bully Sun Jr. in an hour 25. For me, that's good enough. Even in my own experience, when I speak about my dogs, the ones that are in my pedigrees, the ones that I bred, I don't never say they were all desperately game or extremely game or some of them were dead game. Or I very rarely say that. But what I do say is none of the dogs in my pedigrees quit. None of the dogs that I bred were curs. So you can look at several different ways. But if you know me, I just didn't keep dogs that quit. So in my eyes, the ones I used had to be what I considered game at least. And a lot of them showed a lot of heart. So that's the way I do it. Because on the flip side, you have others, and this is true too, that will say they can make any dog quit. Well, that's true. One old timer told me I can get any dog to quit if I put 10 dogs on them. Well, take that into perspective. So you can put all kinds of negatives on a dog, and yeah, it'll quit. If you break its spirit, it's going to quit. The job of a conditioner handler competitor breeder was not to put those negatives intentionally on a dog in that way, where you're gonna treat them as poorly as you can, and you're gonna have them as poor shape as you can, and you're gonna have them as overweight as you can, and you're gonna do all this negative things, or put them under these negative circumstances that don't make any sense, that's not fair, that's not conducive to what you're trying to do, and the dog will quit. There's people that have done that just to say, see, I told you, every dog will quit. And you have some dogs that have shown gameness and then quit later. Now, why they quit later is generally the circumstances that they were put under. And you have dogs that quit, quote unquote quit, and then didn't quit later. Again, there's reasons for that. The circumstances. Maybe better feed, better conditioning, better environment, better care, better bonding with the dog. Some dogs don't like some people. It's generally because of the way that person treats them. So if you look at it from the dog's point of view, why would they do anything for that person that they don't like, that don't like them, that don't show them affection, that don't show them any respect? He'd probably quit too. And I don't know if that's exactly how the dog feels, but I understand where with one person he might not quit, and with another person he might. Because there is that bonding, that spiritualism, if you want to use that word, connected between a man and dog, or woman and dog, that the dog can relate to and react to. So if you have a dog in poor condition, wormy, a bunch of parasites all over it, unhealthy, in poor condition, underweight, like a Holocaust victim, or overweight to where it's obese and can't breathe, probably going to quit. With those scenarios, I would say that's the person's fault, not the dog's fault. So as I moved along in my time with the dogs, I got to the point where I wanted to try and do everything right. Put them in as good circumstances as I could, put them in as good condition as I could, feed them as good as I could, have their housing and environment and that bonding with them as good as I could, and be as close to that dog mentally as I could, and affectionate as I could, so that if the dog did quit, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't because of something I did. The dog just wasn't game. That happens. There's no way to tell until you see it. But some people will put them in those adverse situations, and the dog will quit. They'll call it all kinds of names and think negative of it and don't like it and all that stuff, without taking any blame for their own personal actions. So, are there levels to it? You could say yes. Is it finite that a dog either quits or don't quit? Yep. And some examples of where do we see this, how do we see this gameness played out? Not just in the physical sense, not just in passing what we were looking at a show or at a roll or at an OTC or match or whatever you want to call it. But in its DNA, in its genetic makeup, does that have anything to do with it? In its physicality, are physical traits connected to gameness? In my opinion, yeah, they are. They have to be. The dog has to be tough and durable. Same with a horse, chicken, bird, whatever it is, hound dog, whatever it is. The physical traits have to play a role in it. Because you can't have a skinny, weak, thin bone cow hawk, sway back, physically unhealthy, not physically sound, however the dog's built, individual, and expect it to be game. So health, vitality, constitution, bone structure, muscle, whatever you want to call it, soundness, mental capacity, how the dog feels, how it thinks, all play a role in whether it's going to exhibit that it's game or it's not game. When those things break down, you can almost guarantee that a dog's going to quit. And even under some of those circumstances, or all of those circumstances, I've seen and had dogs that would not quit. Now someone will take that and say, well, under this circumstance, it would have quit. Or under this other circumstance, I could get it to quit. That may be true. But when it comes to that, what you're looking at and the experience at that time, that's all you can go by. Anybody could say, woulda, shoulda, coulda, all that. And anybody that doesn't have respect for the dogs, that's the way they talk. And that's why they degrade the dog and down talk the dog and downplay the event. It wasn't that hard on him. He wasn't in that bad a shape. If a dog can't breathe, they're going to quit generally, because they're going to lose all their faculties. They don't have the capacity to even think. It's lost. So they'll quit from being overheated or fatigued before they will from pain or frustration or other factors. That's why you don't want to put them in those situations. Even in the legal sports side of it, if a dog's not physically fit and strong, he's not going to be able to pull much weight, and he'll just sit there and quit. I've seen him do it. Can't do it. I've seen dogs that previously ran treadmill races and won them, and then they put them in another event, in a later event with no conditioning, too heavy, not that good of health, a previous winner, and the dog will quit on the treadmill. He can't run what he did when he was physically fit. So that's on the lower end of it. Imagine doing that to dogs with what we used to do with them back in the day. You can understand why they would quit. So it's not so cut and dried when you say a dog is either a cur or it's game. There's factors involved. Which leads into something else. Do dogs produce more game dogs if they don't quit and less game dogs if they do quit? In my opinion, that part is true. And immediately someone will say, well, there's been curs, there's been cold dogs, there's been dogs with no athletic ability, just, stupid dogs, or again, different adjectives you want to use, subpar dogs, and that produce very game dogs, great dogs, which is true, can't deny that. But that, to me, is on the lower end of the spectrum. You're not going to have any consistency using dogs like that. You're not going to have any long-term success doing dogs like that, using dogs like that, or breeding dogs like that. And the proof of that is, especially in my day and before that, you couldn't go to someone's yard and they're going to tell you all these dogs quit and they produce great dogs. They might have one or two here and there over a period of time that were exceptions to that rule, and that's what they are, exceptions to the rule. Because the history of a breed doesn't show that. Most of the famous dogs that have bloodlines named after them, and most of the famous dogs that were popular or known throughout the history of breed, because there's a ton of them that ain't known. But those ones that were exposed and written about, most of them were used in competition. And most of them have a record to back it up of competition and of production rate. again, most of the bloodlines named after dogs are after dogs that were competed with. Whether you go back in the day and you say Fly of Panama and the Gas House Dog and Tudor's Goldie and Kobe's Pinscher and Armitage Kager, moving up through time to Cotton's Bullet and Trahan's Rascal and Tudor's Dibo, Indian Boleo and Grand Champion Art and Grand Champion Zebo and Blackjack Jr. and Grand Champion Boomerang, Grand Champion Mayday, Champion Jeep, Champion Honey Bunch, Boyle's Dirty Mary. Overwhelmingly, the dogs that were producers were dogs that were competed with, and most of them were proven to be game dogs. Again, there's exceptions, and they were great dogs too. You can say Black Widow, Hammond's Rufus, Carver's Stompanato. Those dogs were not competed with. Now, I don't know if they were tested. I don't know if they were even touched. I don't know if they were cold, because you get different stories. So I'll avoid saying all that stuff. But I do know that, as far as I know, and throughout searching records, those dogs weren't competed with. But again, those are the exceptions. And even a dog, let's say a dog that was a good producer or even a great producer that was used, was a dog that quit or a dog that was cold. Generally in their background, there's a history of gameness and competition. And some dogs that are said to have quit, famous dogs, and I won't name them just out of respect for the dogs, generally the conditions they quit under were not good, meaning they were not healthy, meaning they were too old, meaning there was something wrong with them. I've seen dogs lose that were full of parasites by experienced dogmen and still bring them to the show like that. And dogs that emptied out bloody stools and discolored urine and still competed with. Sometimes they won, more often than not they lost. And under some circumstances, those dogs quit too. So again, that's not fair to the dog to just call it a curve. The dog quit. That was not the dog's fault under those conditions. That's not the dog's fault, that's the person's fault. People have a hard time sometimes taking responsibility for their actions. But if you learn to do that, if you can come to that point, it'll make you a better dog person. And it'll make you make better decisions and make sure that you do things right so you don't have that guilt and you don't have those thoughts and your ego doesn't get in the way. So in my opinion, yeah, and there's dogmen who agree with me like Mr. Gray, gameness produces gameness. Quitting produces quitting. And the records show that more often than not, that is the case. One other thing that has come up too is, once a dog quits, does that change their ability to produce gameness? Again, there's no science behind this. So it would take people that actually track that method and looked at the numbers and the percentages to see if that was true. In my opinion, yeah, it would. And I'm not saying that it changes their whole gene pool or it changes their DNA, but I'm saying it could. Because the physical things and epigenetic things and what you go through mentally as well as physically can change your DNA, then something like a dog quitting, in my opinion, has a potential to change that DNA too. Whereas if the dog hadn't quit, he might have a higher percentage of producing gameness than he did after he quit. Again, there's nothing to back that up other than my opinion. But you have other examples in other areas where drastic changes in an individual does change the DNA in them. For example, I mentioned Holocaust victims. Because of what they went through, that poor health and that degrading that they had to go through, and physically how it tore them down and took everything out of them. It's been proven that their health didn't improve, and it's been proven in their children they were not as healthy as they should have been if their parents hadn't gone through that ordeal. That makes sense. That's simple to understand. And, you know, I mentioned this before, I'll do it again because it can't hardly be mentioned enough. We speak about gameness and how important it is. And to some people, gameness it's not that important. To some competitors, it wasn't that important because they put more on the ability of the individual than they did on the gameness, right? But gameness is the foundation of the breed. You got to have it, and it'll come up sometimes where in the past where it was needed to be shown, or due to the circumstances of the show or the opponents or whatever it is, that gameness, and if you want to say going some long distance, it happens, right? Now those types of people are banking, and they're right, they're banking on not having to go a long distance and the show ending quickly, which is why they focus more on the ability. But once you lose that gameness and you don't focus on it, the ability starts to be affected as well. No matter how hard a dog bites, no matter how strong it is and how fast it is. Because, like I said, those physical things are directly related to gameness, in my opinion at least. And of course, dogs were culled out of a breeding program for a lot less reasons than gameness. And that's why I mentioned that, because that's what people talk about, gameness and ability and all that stuff. But to produce consistently and healthy and strong, durable individuals, gameness, ability, and all that stuff, that's just one factor. There's other factors involved. I'll just say major flaws. If there's major flaws in your dogs and you don't eliminate them from your program, then it's going to affect the gameness of your dogs. It's going to affect the ability of your dogs. It's going to affect the structure. It's going to affect the mental capacity, which is another reason. Gameness is mental, mostly in my opinion. There's physical things that are connected to it. That's always going to be true. But if you have a mental breakdown of an individual, it's going to affect the gameness of the future offspring. I would almost take that to the bank, if not take it to the bank, because it's all connected. Just like the electricity running through your body, or the adrenaline, or the electricity meaning the signals from the heart to the brain and going out to your muscles and tendons and all your feet, hands, legs, and all that. It's all connected. So even though it's the mental capacity of the dog for the most part, it's related physically and it's related mentally. Those two things are related. So again, the words we use to describe gameness could be used as seen as being different levels. Because if we do use the term dead game, and we do use the term cur and pit game and desperately game and very game, once you get to the dead game part, that's a whole nother level. So in that respect, yeah, there's levels to it. At the same time, if someone wants to say you're the game or you're not, yeah, that's true too. So it's a conversation that's going to go back and forth and disagreed upon and agreed upon, and everybody's going to have their opinion. So again, in my opinion, the only way to know gameness is to see it. And then you can tell the difference. And you can use different words to describe different levels of it, or it can be finite, whether you're either not or you ain't. So that's my little video for today. Tell me what you think. Thanks for your support. More on the way.